Hi, I'm Dennis from Plain Truth Ministry. Welcome to Friday in the Word. Today we're going to look at the first of the seven churches that Jesus addresses in the book of Revelation. That first church is the church at Ephesus. The text we'll look at comes from Revelation chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. The church at Ephesus is an interesting choice for the first choice of Jesus to address. It is one of the most mentioned Gentile churches in the New Testament. Paul wrote a letter directly to them, the book of Ephesians. He wrote two letters to Timothy, who was pastor at the church at Ephesus. And there are other mentions of the church of the church at Ephesus in other letters. Being that the church was founded basically by Paul, he ministered to the church for 3 years himself personally. Priscilla and Aquila were strong believers who were part of that church and who were sound doctrinally and taught in that church. Paul personally chose Timothy to lead the church forward after he was going to leave, and even the Apostle John pastored at that church for a time. So the church was well developed and had solid leadership, and its doctrine was sound, and that allowed it to better understand and better address false doctrines when they became apparent. The text reads, "To the angel of the church of Ephesus write, these things says he who holds the seven stars in his right hand, who walks in the midst of the seven golden lampstands." So he's writing to the angel of the church at Ephesus, that is the leader of the church at Ephesus, and he's telling John to write these things. And as we'll see as he addresses the other churches, Jesus characterizes himself differently to the different churches. In this case, he characterizes himself as he who holds the seven stars in his right hand, who walks in the midst of the seven golden lampstands. That is Christ's characterization of himself here. He goes on to say, "I know your works, your labor, your patience, and that you do not bear those who are evil, and you have tested those who say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars. And you have persevered and have patience and have labored for my name's sake and have not become weary." All these things sound like very positive things that this church is doing and has done over time. It is obviously sound doctrinally, and it obviously has sound leadership. However, in verse 4, he says, "Nevertheless, I have this against you, that you have left your first love." You have left your first love. That is what Jesus has against this church. What does that mean? Well, when we look at any church, this church in particular that is doctrinally sound, what Jesus is saying is the church has become mechanical. It is sound doctrine, but it does things for the sake of duty. It's what Jesus is simply saying here is that the church has forgotten the why that it does what it does. And that why is Jesus. In effect, it has lost its passion for why it was a church and why it behaves in the way that it behaves. Jesus says you need to regain that passion. In verse 5, he says, "Remember therefore where you have fallen, repent, and do the first works." The first works are the passion of Christ and the passion for doing God's will. "Or else I will come to you quickly and remove your lampstand from its place, unless you repent. You have chosen," he says, "But this you have, that you hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate." Nicholas was a false teacher that Jesus mentions by name. And then he finishes by saying, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God." Repent and return. And that's the first church. God bless.